Da-da-da-da. And here we are. And it says, we are live.
Oh, splendid. We are live.
Once again, here we are. Hi, folks. We're very excited today to have a real live, honest to God, professor.
Oh,
I'm just a nobody. She left school. How old were you?
11.
11, and I was 15. But we have an honest to God professor on here.
Yeah.
And his resume it speaks for itself. I'm going to have to just increase the font size here for a minute because I'm getting old when I'm 65, you know. Walter Everett is our guest today. He is the author of 6 books and the editor of another, including 4 on our lads, the Fabs, the Beatles. All of them are available at Amazon and other online booksellers. He is a professor of music at the University of Michigan. He's devoted more than 30 years to teaching and often offering courses on the Beatles music. And he also teaches online courses on the Beatles with Jack Petrozelli of the Fab Four and New York producer guitarist Cameron Greider. You can learn more. Read the crawl across the bottom. He has his own website is down there. And without further ado, we welcome Professor Walter Everett. Thanks for joining us on Tariff Tuesday. I'm sorry, TeaFlix Tuesday.
Oh, TeaFlix, right. Yeah, thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you, Angie, for the invitation.
Thank you.
So happy to be talking with you.
Yes, I'm sorry we had a technical glitch last week and couldn't do it, but here we are again.
Here we are.
Yeah,
here we are, and our guests are signing on from all over the world and all over the place, and down the road, Paul Moody. And good to see you, Robbie. And hi, Marianne. Hi, Sammy from Atlanta. Lots of folks joining today. So I guess the first things first, right? It's always like people always say, well, where were you born or how old are you? But what was the genesis of your first Beatle book and knowing that you really had a passion for researching it as deeply as you do?
Oh, gosh. I have to go way back, if you'll indulge me. I mean, I'm a first-generation Beatles fanatic. And so when they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in February '64, I was hooked. I'd had 3 years of piano lessons before that and stuck with piano. I was playing Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, Bartok, and Beatles. Right. But when I saw the Beatles that night, it changed my life. I knew music was going to be my life. And so I've been at it ever since. And the Beatles have always been at the center of all my teaching, all my research. I even have the distinction of having been kicked out of my PhD program.
Well, that's good.
Nice.
You need a T-shirt for that. I was kicked out of my PhD.
I didn't know I was being a rebel, but, you know, I proposed a dissertation on Abbey Road, and I was called into the chair's office, and they said, Mr. Everett, we thought you were a serious scholar, and they cut my funding.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was exiled for years until I decided, well, you know, I really do want to teach university, and to do that, I need a degree. And I figured if the Beatles could write a song, you know, that was really, really great, maybe I should look at Schubert. So I did a Schubert dissertation, and the rest is history. I started writing articles.
How wonderful. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, when you started writing these books originally in depth, what first inspired you to study the Beatles from a theoretical and, you know, scholarly perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, Angie, because at the time when I started my career in academia, you know, it was just like my experience proposing a dissertation. Just in this country, if you wanted to analyze music, pop music was off limits. It was just not considered worthy of study. No. Because people weren't really listening, and the scholars would go to the library and get out scores and see what was written down and Beethoven's notation and all. And if it weren't notated, I'm convinced they just were not hearing what was going on in pop. Because you listen to it, you don't read it, you listen to it.
Yeah,
that's right.
They probably, I often draw food analogies. Our audience know we represent a bunch of chefs and I'm a big foodie. And it was probably back in the day, the difference between gourmet organic ingredients like Schubert and Bach and junk food, which they considered the Beatles to be because it was so popular and it was earworm and it was toe tapping stuff. They probably thought it was junk food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Beatles were in my bones, and I wrote an essay on Strawberry Fields and Julia as representations of John Lennon writing about his imagination.
Yeah.
And I was shocked it was accepted by, a really highfalutin music journal. And so, after I joined the faculty, my second year, my chair called me in, the same chair who told me he thought I was a serious scholar. I was on the faculty. He said, well, Everett, you've got to write a book. I said, oh, really? Oh, yeah. If you want tenure, you've got to publish a book.
Oh, good grief.
Well, the Beatles it's the only thing I know anything about.
Yeah.
And he said, well, why don't you see what happens? And if that hadn't worked out, I'd probably be nothing against shoe salesmen, but pumping gas in New Jersey or something,
Well, that's the other way to meet girls if you can't play an instrument, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the music theory world, they just swarm. You wouldn't have to
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
So, their songwriting certainly evolved. If you think about 1962 and the toe tapping four on the floor type stuff, between there and 1970 at the end, their songwriting evolved massively according to, their influences. But from a music theory standpoint, what do you think were the most, let's say, groundbreaking elements of their evolution? Was it history? Was it time? Was it influence? Was it a little of all of the above? Or
all of that? Their ears were just huge. And before they really, John and Paul started writing very early, but before they really became composers, the Beatles had learned a repertoire of like 300 songs they played in the clubs, right?
Right.
Sure.
Their ears were just open to everything they were playing, everything they were hearing. It got so they could hear a song once or twice and perform it. So when they started with the EMI contract, they already had a lot of music making under their belt. And, and they were able to, put like things that Paul learned from his dad into work, and all the Little Richard and Elvis and Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, all found its way. And then as the years went on, everything they listened to, Indian music, classical music,
right.
Everything, electronic music, everything became part of their shtick, and they were able to work it in. I started, like I said, my first article was on Strawberry Fields and Julia, which I considered, some of John's best songs.
Yeah.
And then I wrote an essay on She's Leaving Home, one of my favorite McCartney songs. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote on Abbey Road. And that's when my chair told me, hey, you need to write a book. And I said, okay, well, if I'm going to write a book on the Beatles, I have to, the early songs have to, stand up as well. And I wrote an essay on She Loves You, and I now consider that their first masterpiece. It's just
great. Yeah.
Brilliant.
What I love about that song in particular is they are talking to the everyman. It was, I think, and it probably came from the influence of what was called country and western music, which was in the working men's clubs in Liverpool at the time. And it was a lyric that could literally fit anyone's life.
Yeah. A lot of country songs have like a narrative structure where the singer is trying to get a story across, and verse after verse after verse continues the story, completes the story. And that's what She Loves You is. It's a friend talking to a friend, and you learn a little bit more. You learn in the first verse what the problem is. In the second verse, hey, she it might be open to you, and then in the third verse everything works out right. So that is a very country-like,
that's right,
narrative structure.
Right, because country and western, like I said, there were country and western dance nights at the working men's clubs in the northwest of England at that time, and they would be playing, you know, Hank Williams and all of the Patsy Cline and all the old school country and western, as it was called then.
Like you said.
And they were story songs, and that's probably where they went, oh well, you know, let's have a conversation.
And Ringo evidently was in his young days, he was very keen on western music, country and western.
Sure, yeah.
And now he's back at it again.
Yeah, he just sold out the Ryman and made a country album.
Yeah.
I know. It brings you back to when he said he wanted to emigrate to Texas. Right? Before Rory Storm, that was his. That was his goal.
I tell you what, though, many fans experience the Beatles' music emotionally, but you sort of break it down analytically.
That's right.
How do you balance the academic and the emotional appreciation of their work?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Angie, because I do get that question a lot. You know, as a music theorist, I deal with everything that happens within the music itself. The melody, the harmony, the rhythm, the tone color, how instruments and vocals are used, and lyrics, and formal structure, how different sections of the song work together. And it always helps me understand what is being communicated in the words. I almost always find that these things that are going on in the music get across what is happening in the words, sometimes even more so. Like a song like George Harrison's Something.
Yes.
The whole song is about how he can't find the words to express himself, right? Everything's at the tip of the tongue. Something in the way she moves, you know, I can't put words to it. But then he gets the guitar out for the solo. Yeah. And it all becomes clear. It's in the music, right? So, yeah, I mean, you know, I use a lot of terms that the Beatles never heard, or a lot of your listeners may never have heard. The terms aren't important, though. It's the ideas that the terms represent that are important. And the ideas actually are less important than the emotional things that they refer to.
Yeah, I remember, because Angie grew up playing the piano very young, and she qualified as England's youngest music teacher ever. She got her teaching certificate when she was just shy of her 13th birthday. So she was a 12-year-old teacher.
Clever little sod.
Who left school at 11, by the way. And I remember Paul coming home one weekend saying, "Hey, Orange," because, you know, she could read music and he couldn't. "Hey, Orange, somebody in the press last week accused me of using an Aeolian cadence. What is an Aeolian cadence when it's at home?" And she's like, "Search me, son. I could read the dots, but I'm not a theorist."
Shut up. Have a cup of tea.
Shut up and have some scrambled eggs.
I didn't know the answer.
Yeah.
So I answer like politicians do, it's not a yes/no question, you know.
Yeah.
I love the way politicians answer questions.
Maybe. Yeah.
But going into something that happened years ago in history. And totally off the subject.
Speaking of the famous Aeolian cadence, which had Paul scratching his head, the Beatles, you know, they were famous for experimenting with modes and chord progressions and even studio techniques. So, I mean, is there a specific song or maybe an album where you think they truly started to redefine pop rock and music harmony in particular?
Yeah. You know, every album was another step along the way. There were, even you could look at the album Help, which a lot of people just consider, oh, that's early Beatles, but they are already doing things in their harmony. Even in Beatles for Sale, there are a number of songs that use the flat 7 chord, which means, I don't know if the does that get across okay? So if you're in that key, in classical music, the next to the last note, the 7th note of the T, right? right? Just to have something. But in rock music, much more often, you get the lowered 7th scale out of the blues, and so that 7-to-1 relationship, very blues related, comes out in I'm a Loser and Songs on Beatles for Sale, and a number of different ways on the Help album. And then you could point to every album had something new going on.
Well, I mean that those notes that you just played to me, to my ears, they take it from being a James Bond martini to a dirty martini, right?
Right.
That's a girl.
In fact,
I can't describe it any other way in the food world, but you know,
it's
like,
exactly it. It's dirty. It's just like singing with multiphonics. You know, the growl of Twisted Shout.
Have a little fun.
Yeah. It's music does not always have to have a sweet sound, or like in I'm the Walrus, right? Like the way Lennon could take a descending, you said modal, Aeolian scale, and put against that a rising Dorian scale, and then harmonize it with all major chords, and you end up with in the coda of I'm the Walrus, and the chords just get stranger and stranger and stranger.
Yeah.
I think it might have been those jazz cigarettes.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if you had to pick one Beatles song that best represents their sort of harmonic and melodic ingenuity, what would it be?
That's a tough
question.
question.
Trick question.
Yeah, you know, I love You Never Give Me Your Money because it has a lot of different harmonic languages.
Right.
Yes.
You know,
we have to be careful of copyright, by the way, so you can't play the whole thing. But
no, I won't play the whole thing. I'll play little bits. Okay, so it starts off with
right. I think we're good with the copyright there.
Okay, good. Well, sure, as long as it's not the Beatles playing. I think I've never had a bot take me down. Anyway, the structure. Very classical,
very Bach,
actually, at the beginning, and then we modulate from A minor to C major. Into more Jim McCartnney type language, right?
Almost like ragtime. That's when
he had to be thinking of his dad, I think, when he wrote tunes like that.
Before the arthritis really got bad in my dad's hands, he would play syncopated ragtime rhythm type stuff on the piano, you know. So it was very like that, like I said, syncopated. But and I think that, you know, again, I've said it before, but the Black Dyke Mills Band, the Thingamabob, you know, that was, if you weren't from Northern England in a certain period of time, you wouldn't know what colliery bands were. They used to have them for morale they would play music down in the coal mines to keep everybody on their toes. And
in the mines,
mines. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I thought that was like a lunch break.
No, they would take their instruments down. I mean, they didn't take the big bass drums and stuff down there, but they would take trumpets and trombones down there with them, and in the lunch break they would play music.
Of course, they had social clubs where they would,
and then that's where it came from.
Yeah.
It's, you know, but if our friend Ray Connolly, who is an amazing journalist and writer and film screenwriter, he's got a book out at the moment called Born at the Right Time, and boy, you know, if the Beatles hadn't been just post-war babies who then lived into and flourished in the psychedelic era, we wouldn't have the music that we have.
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's funny, that Thingamabob, I can relate that to the song Walking in the Park with Eloise.
That's right.
You know that one, right?
My dad wrote.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great great tune, great recording. Were there any others like that? Did Jim have any other songs kicking into his own?
Not completely finished. I mean, he had a few little bits and pieces that he never glued together. But
the only one ever published was Eloise, Walking in the Park.
Do you remember the night Paul called from Nashville?
Yeah. Yes, Paul called from Nashville and said, we're recording that song of my dad's that goes dum bum 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 bum, and I can't remember the middle eight. So will you get my dad to the piano? So arthritis was pretty bad by then, but helped him over to the piano, and he played it for them. Paul and Linda were recording with Chet Atkins and Floyd Kramer, whom
my dad had never heard of. P.S.
Oh no, really?
No, not in Liverpool. You know, you lived in your own little bubble. Right. Liverpool Echo. Space Course.
1971, I guess it would be 71, 72, some of that.
And it finished up being in a movie called Ethel and Ernest. Have you ever seen that?
No, I didn't know that.
I'll send you some details afterwards.
Great. That's
graphic. Yeah, it's a graphic novel.
You know, there's a lot of influence Jim had on Paul that hasn't been recognized. Like, I know Jim used to do a lot of crossword puzzles, right?
Yeah, we still do.
I heard that he told Paul at one time when Paul was small, he said, you got to think carefully about the words. You have to smell them. You have to be able to feel their texture. He loved words.
Oh yeah, he did.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
And Paul, I think, put that into his lyric writing. If you think about the texture of the words in Eleanor Rigby.
Oh yeah.
The weariness that you get from all the w sounds, the w sounds, that where a wedding has been, at the window wearing, you know,
face, the tea leaves in a jar by the door.
The idea of weariness, and then it turns to an sound, the church and words of a sermon and working and church buried at the dirt, right? Dirt. It leads to this burial at the end because of the sounds of the words.
Yes,
my dad used to make up words. It was funny, you know, I was 4 when he adopted me and gave me the family name, and you know, I was just learning English. I was reading early. I was reading basic ABCs at 2, and I was reading the newspaper at 4 or 5. And so I would sit on his armchair and watch him do the crossword. That's where I developed my love of words, and ultimately, in my music career, I became a lyricist too. I've written over 300 songs with BMI.
No kidding, Ruth, is that right?
Yeah.
Right? I would love to see
that secret.
Yeah. Just go to Apple iTunes and type in my name. One of my albums up there. So I had a hit with Randy Crawford, a song called "Cigarette in the Rain," which was basically about Julian Lennon losing John. Like a cigarette in the rain, a single drop puts out the flame, and the drop was the shot. And so I learned at a very early age how, you know, Jim would say words matter. And if families would get into argy-bargy at parties, there'd be too much alcohol or whatever. My dad was always the silent one, because he'd say, you know, you can't take a word, you can't take something back. Words matter. And he would make words up, like, you know, I'd say,
it's impersausageable.
Impersausageable. You know, he had terrible arthritis, and I would hop up and down or do cartwheels in front of him and say, I bet you can't do this. And he'd say, no, my love, it's impersausageable. And he was
that reminds me of Stanley Unwin. Was he?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so I was constantly asking as a child, well, why, Dad? Why? You know, the 5-year-old nag question, why? And one day he sat up very straight in his armchair and he said, because, are you listening? There's no hairs on a seagull's chest.
Okay. So we still use that when we don't know how to answer.
When I don't know, I just say, well,
there's no hairs on the seagull's chest.
Because there's nothing you can say to that.
No, you can't.
Nothing you can say that can't be said. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
So many artists today, because, you know, we're quoting the Beatles, many artists are influenced by the Beatles, yet pop music has changed drastically. I mean, now we've got, you know, a lot of hip hop and rap and real sort of boy bands and K-pop and so on. But do you see any of the modern artists, if you listen to them, applying any of those similar harmonic or structural sort of Beatles lessons?
Yeah, well, it goes back a couple of decades, but you know, Fountains of Wayne just sounded like the Beatles sideways. Nirvana had a lot of chord progressions, and they remind me of the White Album a good bit. Nirvana.
And of course, Oasis. Right?
So, yeah, of course, Oasis. Yeah, that almost goes without saying, right? So I'm sure there's a lot still going on today. You know, I imagine, you know, a lot of pop music is based on the same ideas that the Beatles created.
Yeah, no, I mean, their influence is just immeasurable. Really, you couldn't catalog it. I don't care who you are. You know.
It's massive. It's true of a lot of what was going on in the 50s and 60s. I mean, you know, Brian Wilson contributed so much to harmonic ideas, and there are others, of course, and you know, people who deserved more influence than they got, like Frank Zappa. You know, what a brilliant musician. But you don't hear too much that reminds you of Zappa these days.
No, that's true. But no, I'm sure he was a Beatle fan, and some of it must have seeped in through the cracks somewhere.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
for sure.
So your 2-volume set, The Beatles as Musicians, it's a go-to resource for musicologists and Beatles fans. What was the most challenging part of writing those books?
Yeah, well, you mentioned copyright. It was a big tussle with my editor, who was very supportive, but she worked with a number of lawyers to allow me to quote as much as I did. We didn't want to get into a situation where we were having to get permission from the copyright owner.
Publishers,
Yeah, because they just had a reputation for just shutting down any work. But you know, I've been fine. Like I say, I've gotten tons of support. Other than that, I don't remember much challenge. I wrote them basically in summers when I was up at the summer music camp my kids went to, and I would take care of them during the day, make sure they got to their art class and swimming and everything, and then I'd write for about 6-7 hours every night. And it was so relaxing up there. Wow. I you know, only needed 3 or 4 hours of sleep.
Wow, that's discipline though, to be able to sit and do it like that, like a job.
It was fun, and you know, I'm so lucky, Ruth. My 33-year career teaching, I always got to teach exactly what I wanted to teach. Nobody ever told me, "Oh, do it this way." I was so lucky. And now that I'm retired from University of Michigan, I'm emeritus. I don't know what that means. I don't feel like I have any particular merit, but I'm retired, and I don't have to answer to deans or chairs or whatever. So I mean, it's always just been a joy, a pleasure.
Great.
What I
wanted to talk about, you've done deep dives into their recording techniques, haven't you, and harmonic structures. So if you went back in time,
if you could go in a time machine,
and ask George Martin or the band just one question about their music making, what might it be?
Oh, you know, so many, like, how did you come up with this or that? You know, just simple things like lyrics, like, you know, in She's Leaving Home, I remember really being struck by the line, she goes downstairs to the kitchen clutching her handkerchief.
Yeah.
Because what do you think of when you hear kitchen clutching handkerchief?
Somebody's crying and they're running away from
Paul came home about 3 o'clock in the morning with an acetate of that. They'd just finished it in the studio, and he came up to his father and I in Liverpool and said, "Come on, get up, come down in the middle of the night. I want you to hear this." I listened to it. I was in floods of tears.
Yeah.
Oh, my little girl, she's leaving out.
Yeah. So, you know, I would love to know, they must have been kicking around different ideas when Paul came up with those 3 words. Did he do it all himself? And that about, you know, every song, there'd be questions about how did this come up and who thought of this? And
right. You know, and
have to be there at the time, because now they wouldn't remember, right?
And she's leaving home, I always think of a runaway teenager, right? Probably heading down for the big smoke, getting away from an abusive, you know, family or a relationship or whatever. And for me, the grown-up person that little runaway girl turns into is the woman in Just Another Day.
Oh yeah, they're very similar themes, aren't they?
Okay. You can imagine it being the person who she's leaving home and she becomes, you know, dipping into pockets, slipping into shoes, dipping in the pocket of her raincoat. It's just another day.
Yeah.
But she's getting on the bus. She's got a job. She's made a life because she left home. I've always thought it was the same person.
Yeah.
Don't know why, but
really insightful. And I remember when Ram came out, I bought the album and I was disappointed that Another Day was not on the album.
Yeah.
I ripped off, but I'm okay with it now.
Yeah. So
Such a good single.
Given the vast amount of writing and lesson planning and, you know, curriculum there is on the Beatles, how do you approach adding new insights to your conversation, and how important is having third-party partners to bounce off for you when you develop content?
It's great you asked that, Ruth, because, you know, I'm doing this teaching now, online Beatles class.
Yep, I know.
With Jack and Cameron, you mentioned.
rpm-school.com.
Yeah, that's right. And I always start from scratch. I always go back to the things and think about them as if for the first time. And that's the thing about the Beatles. There's always new things to discover. You don't have to try to freshen it up. It just, you know, if your ears are open, you're always hearing something new. I remember telling Mark Lewis years and years ago, I said, you know, I really wrote those Beatles books thinking, okay, now I'll get the Beatles out of my system and I'll move on to Stockhausen or something.
No chance.
He got this horrified look on his face.
Yeah.
What? No, it'll never happen.
Yeah, absolutely. But now, as an author, how do you decide what to include in a book like the Beatles as musicians? Where do you draw the line between like analysis and storytelling?
Yeah, it's word limits are a hard reality. You know, you can't go beyond the word limit you have. And with the Beatles, you know, I'm very fortunate because the general history is now pretty well covered elsewhere. I don't have to write about that. I don't have to write about the fashion and all the social things that they did. I can focus on the music and my interpretation of what that means. So I can present whatever analysis that is pertinent to a particular interpretation. I don't have to talk about the harmony all the time. I don't have to talk about the rhythm all the time. I just focus on the things I've found in the music that really mean something in an interpretation. So I've been lucky that the word limit has allowed me to do that.
Well, what we started doing with Madam's books here about a decade ago now is obviously word limit equals font size equals number of pages equals print cost equals publisher cost equals retail cost for the fan. And people, often readers don't know the back path of why a publisher will say you can't be more than 12-point font, so many words, because otherwise it's just unprintable cost-wise, right? It's just a money thing. Right. So what we've been able to do starting a decade ago is use QR codes. And so for, you know, any books that Angie writes, we will link to a TeaFlix interview so you can get so much more out of it. And there is no word count. There's no word limit. So thank God for technology, because now you have a video book, you know?
I know. The QR codes mean people don't have to type in the URLs. It's great. And last two books, last three books actually have an online companion site. So there's a lot I can put online that doesn't have to take up that space in the printed book.
And the chopped down trees. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, you think about the scribes of old, it had to fit in between the front cover and the back cover and the spine, right? Nowadays, we can, you know, go to multimedia and link to BBC footage or whatever is out there, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, you have to be careful because, you know, things come and go on the internet, right? But if you have control over the website and, you know, my publisher's always going to support, it'll be there 20 years, 30 years from now.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we stream this live to Facebook, but Martin downloads it and we put it on our YouTube channel and we have a hard drive backup and it goes on McCartney.com. So there's plenty of places where people can see it that we can link to later from, you know, whatever she might decide to write next. You know?
Yeah, I was looking the other night, I was in bed and I wakened up in the middle of the night and couldn't sleep. And I put the television on and I went to YouTube and I was just clicking through. And suddenly I saw Ruth and I, and in fact, in these colors. And it was an earlier TeaFlix that we'd done. Yeah. And I thought, oh, how funny.
There I am on telly.
Very supportive colors. I love your thought there.
Yeah, we wore them today for good reason. So we don't get political, but we figured people would figure it out. So
it's hard to imagine there could be, you know, an opposite viewpoint on Ukraine. It's so important.
Yeah. There is, and you have to respect it because people, you know, we all come from different strokes, right? So Ange has a question. Speaking of QRs and technology.
The new AI generated Beatles music, like Now and Then, and ongoing archival releases. Do you think there are still new things to learn about their music?
Oh, well, I don't need AI to tell me what's going on in the music. I just, you know, start listening and find new things. But Now and Then is, I think, a fantastic recording. And you know, whether you call it AI or just, you know, new studio techniques, I think it's brilliant. And I give Paul a huge amount of credit because I know he worked for years with different producers trying to get that song completed. And he finally did it in a way that doesn't steal the spotlight from John Lennon.
Right.
His bass playing is very in the background. It's not full of lots of notes like in Something or My Guitar Gently Weeps. And the backing vocals are so Beatley. And when Paul plays the slide solo, it's an homage to George. It's not like this is Paul would play the solo. He plays it like George would. So Paul really steps in the background. I think characteristically, I think he, you know, he wants John and George and Ringo to shine more than he does. So I think Now and Then is a brilliant use of technology to do that.
I mean, basically, for those watching who don't really, and I guess one word we misused when we wrote the questions was AI generated. It wasn't. Nothing was generated. And back to the food analogy, it's like if you have a giant pot of minestrone, what they did was they picked out the pasta and they made it raw. They picked out the tomatoes and uncooked them. They picked out the onions and put them all back together again. So they deconstructed the elements or the ingredients of the song. And then with Martin, my husband we have the same technology at McCartney.ai. We do it all the time. People will give us an interview of a very famous rock star, and it was done on a Nagra or an old cassette. And there's a fire engine in the background and dishes clanking. And Martin is able to clean all of that up and just get the voice and then pan it left, right and do stereo. We can do the same thing here that they're doing at Abbey Road. So nothing was generated. I mean, it is an AI tool, but it's all the original ingredients.
Yeah.
I think that's important for fans to understand that, you know, John's voice wasn't manipulated in any way. Right.
Yeah, right. It had to be denoised. It was such a noisy cassette. Yeah.
Well, and also they were glued on one track because George and Paul and Ringo played in the same room at the same time on track one. And so it's for visual people, it's like trying to make a JPEG into a Photoshop document. You need the layers, right? You need to deconstruct all of that stuff. Charlie in Florida is asking, it's up here somewhere. He'd like to know if you see any difference in the young people today that you're teaching and their love of the Beatles versus our generation and how we love our Beatles. Is there a difference in the sort of appreciation or idyllic worship, or
the main difference is that first generation fans were there for every release, and they just have an intuitive grasp of how the Beatles developed over time because they were there.
Yeah.
And today's listeners really have to work to achieve that. They have to get the records in chronological order and try to work them out. But people today, young people, know the Beatles. I was in a delicatessen here in Ann Arbor a couple of months ago, and two of the people behind the counter were playing, what's your favorite Beatles song? And one of them said, oh, mine is I Want You, She's So Heavy, and the other one's like, oh, great choice, deep track, great. And they just know the records inside and out. And I love that Here Comes the Sun is the most streamed Beatles track. I mean, people
interesting.
know the tunes,
Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah.
So do you have any plans for future books on either the Beatles or music in general?
Oh, I'm always doing new books. My last book on sex and gender in rock and pop music covers up through 2 years ago when it came out. Right now I'm working on Beatles stuff tied to this course that I'm teaching. And I don't think I mentioned before that you asked, do conversations I'm involved in now help with my writing? And absolutely. I was headed to say that we have about 35 participants every time we teach a course. It's a small group, but very varied group. Some have no musical background whatsoever. Some really know the Beatles. Some play guitar, but they all contribute insights that will help me. And I know the next time I write about Beatles, I've got a lot of footnotes for people who've been in the class.
Well, it's like it's poll the audience, really, isn't it? It's just a version of that.
Mm-hmm.
So good. So there's more stuff coming up from you.
Okay. Yes. Oh, all right. I've got some notes here because my mind is a bit. I am 95, so I forget things.
Yeah, congratulations. My mom's 96, so
really
fantastic.
You're doing great.
Well, there's no keeping these old broads down. I tell you.
No, not yet. Definitely not. So now, what I wanted to ask was, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of the Beatles' music, either by fans or by scholars?
Is it the junk food aspect, or is it the...
I don't know if it's still the case, but, it always used to be that Lennon was credited with writing the words, McCartney writing the music. And I think that's been pretty much disproven, hasn't it? All the thoughts and opinions about why the Beatles broke up, what did Yoko have to do with that, and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of areas of their personal lives that we'll never understand. And we weren't in the room when things happened, and
we were sometimes.
yeah, present company accepted, of course. But look how the Let It Be Get Back project ideas have changed so dramatically. For decades after Let It Be came out, the band was hard and just terrible straits. They were at each other's throats all the time. It was just a deadly atmosphere. And then the film is re-edited into the Get Back series.
Right.
And suddenly you see them all being lighthearted, even in Twickenham, which was a horrible place to work.
Oh, cold and drafty and traffic to get out there. And
Right. So, you know, that's just, you know, one way that in the last couple of years, opinions have totally changed, you know, 180 degrees.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll always be reinterpreting what they went through, and new information will continue to come to light. You know, everybody's waiting for Mark Lewison's next books to come out because his research is so meticulous. And
my God. It's unbelievable. He flew here once, many years ago now, and spent a whole day with Angie going through her old diaries that she's still got.
I would love to do
carrying around the world everywhere we've gone. My diaries have gone with me, and even this morning I wrote in it.
Yep.
Yeah.
She's got one for every
I don't
year.
write.
You have them backed up. You have digital copies?
No, not of these.
You might want to do that in case there's ever
it would take a lifetime.
Hey, FedEx Kinko's, if you're listening, sponsor the digitization of Madam's diary since 1964, would you?
Wow.
You know what? Hey, if you don't ask, if you don't put it out there, nobody's going to answer, right? The universe is smart, but you know, sometimes you have to ask for things, right? Well, as our regular readers will know, all of the information is going across the bottom of the crawl. When you hit rewind, if you are late to the party and you rewatch this will also go on McCartney.com later today, and our TeaFlix YouTube channel at McCartney Studios. And you can find Walt and his cohorts at it's rpm-school. Is it .com or .net?
.com, and it's actually hyphen. You know, you don't want to hit the shift and make the long dash. It's
I know. It's done that.
School.com.
Yeah. Okay.
Or as we say in German, Bindestrich, not Schrägstrich, which is you see. And there's that, and there's two McCartneys that speak German, me and His Majesty. So there's another piece of trivia for you. Yeah. So, and as our regular readers will know, we always have a limerick, because she is the limerick lady with her Liverpool Limericks book out, and it's March. So, you know, St. Paddy's, get yours today. We always have a limerick for our very special guests, and we will, if you don't mind, are you sitting comfortably? We will begin and sign off with a lovely little limerick. Are you ready, madam?
Yes.
Have we cleared the throat?
I think, yes.
Have we done a deep breath?
Yes.
Jolly good. And a 1, 2, 3. There once was a scholar so clever who studied the Beatles forever. Walt Everett's prose, all their music he knows. We loved hearing about his endeavors.
Oh, how lovely. Oh, it's been such a pleasure. So great.
There you go.
No, thank you so much. It's been fabulous.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one final question. Are you planning any Beatlefest appearances in either New York Metro or Chicago this year, or are you too busy?
I'm doing a thing in the Catskills, the Fab Four, the Beatles tribute band, does a 3-day camp in the Catskills. That'll be in June. I'll be in LA, Irvine, actually, to do a talk in May.
Oh, well, good. Are you flying into LAX or Orange County? Do you know yet?
No, Orange County. I'll be flying.
Well, if it changes, we're right by LAX, and the kettle is always on, and there's usually a corkscrew laying around here somewhere too.
Oh, very sweet. Yeah.
Absolutely. It'd be lovely to have a cup of tea.
We'll get together at some point. We'll have to.
Absolutely. Okay. So do tell, and if you have your folks who are doing the Catskills Fest, let me know. We'd love to have them on and give them some PR and, you know, learn more about what's going on up in them there hills.
That's great. That's great. I sure will. And we'd love to have you come visit our class too. There's so much we can learn from you.
Absolutely. Anytime. Be happy to zoom in and and chit chat. Be fantastic. Yeah. All right, kids. Well, thank you, Professor, for taking the time. We know how busy you are. And go to rpm-school.com to learn more and sign up for these just fabulous classes. And thank you, Walt, for doing what you do from your heart with love to keep the Beatles alive and the music and the message of love, because we need it right now more than ever.
You're absolutely right. Beatles forever.
Absolutely.
And all you need is love. It'll get you through, right?
That's right.
True. Yes.
And Slavy Klein. We will see you guys soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We'll see you all of a sudden.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.